Or y'all gonna kill me like Ma'Khia Bryant?
Are you gonna stab somebody like her?
No,
Okay.
she called y'all for help. You talking about? Get your goofy and you just said that on camera. This going viral.
So what you just watched was a BLM activist mouthing off to a police officer in Washington, D.C. The heckler asking him, "Are you going to kill me like Ma'Khia Bryant?" But the police officer shut him down real fast when he answered, "Are you going to try to stab somebody like her?" And of course, the activist didn't have much to say back because they don't want to acknowledge that the Ohio officer shot her to protect another young black girl from being stabbed in a knife fight. The left wants to argue that a knife fight between two teenage girls is just everyday conflict in the neighborhood. But we have footage of the shooting from a different angle where you can actually hear Bryant say, "I will stab the F out of you," before the officer intervened. I must warn you, it's pretty graphic. Wow. So that's apparently considered a normal day in the community. But what about the grown man trying to kick the girl in the head? Is that also considered regular community conflict? I don't think so. So let's get this straight. Cops are not the problem here. Join me now from Nashville, Tennessee, editor at the Daily Wire and host of the Ian Haworth Show, Ian Haworth. Ian, thank you for joining me. Ian, I'm always kind of amazed what the new narrative is coming from the left, but now it appears that knife fights are okay. That's like community conflict. But we know that it's not. And it's totally outrageous. And if the police officer had just stood there and done nothing, he still would have been called racist, and that would have been malpractice.
I mean, absolutely. This is all part of a strategy to paint the police or the latest people to be the stand-in for the bad guys in any scenario. So it's really a lose-lose situation for the police, because he had 9 seconds to act, by the way. If you actually look at all of the transcripts, all of the video footage, he arrives on the scene and Ma'Khia Bryant is in the act of about to stab someone. Like, this isn't like there was any kind of conflict that was growing. He arrived on the scene as she was about to stab someone, acted very quickly in what any objective person can conclude is a justified use of force. And yet he's being labeled as a racist simply because the left and Black Lives Matter specifically focused on the wrong variables with a lot of these cases. So in the case of Ma'Khia Bryant, it's the fact that it was a black teenager that was shot by the police. Therefore, it's racism. It doesn't matter that the police officer saved another black teenager from being very, very badly harmed or most likely killed. It's the same with Jacob Blake, though. The variable that they cared about was white officer, black person shot. It didn't matter that Jacob Blake was violently resisting arrest and potentially trying to access a knife that he would use against the police. They simply don't care about the variables that really matter, because all they care about is skin color and trying to use skin color to divide us.
And it's pretty fascinating, too, that all of these people who aren't experts in law enforcement now have all these ideas of what could have been done in that situation. They're like, oh, well, why didn't he taser her? Why didn't he shoot up in the air and see what happens, like as a warning shot? Like, that's not what law enforcement does. That's not how they train, because there's a lot of reasons why having a loose bullet in the air, like what could go wrong there. Also, a taser, we know how people react to tasers. That doesn't guarantee that the knife wouldn't have gone into the other girl. And then if you're shooting for a leg, you might miss. You might hit somebody else.
I mean, you'll most likely miss. It's incredibly difficult to hit a moving target, let alone something like a leg or an arm. I think most of the people who come out with that advice tend to have never actually held a gun in their life, let alone fired one. And so they say ridiculous things like Joy Behar, I believe it was, saying, oh, you should have fired the gun in the air. Again, the police officer arrived on the scene, had 9 seconds. And Ma'Khia Bryant's arm was in the process of swinging down with a knife. And so the idea that you could fire a gun in the air, let alone where that gun would land, like, people die from falling bullets. This is a real thing, which, again, the police would be blamed for in the end. Does anyone really think that firing a gun in the air as someone is sort of striking someone with a knife, that they're going to stop mid stab? It's just absurd. And it's just the latest example of how extreme the excuses are going, that even in the case where a police officer saves someone's life, it's simply not enough.
Yeah. I'm troubled by the idea, the message that they're sending. Let kids knife fight. That's okay. But it's not. And knives are very dangerous, as we know. Knives actually kill more people yearly than rifles. So they don't want to talk about how actually knives are very dangerous in this situation when they are used this way. And so are you worried that maybe teenagers might get the message that it's okay, this is like community practice, that this is normal?
I think I'm a little worried. I think a lot of people who live in these neighborhoods know full well what knife crime is. I mean, if you head over to the Daily Wire, we reported on this 100 miles away from where Ma'Khia Bryant almost stabbed someone. A 13-year-old girl was stabbed to death because there was no police officer there to save her, and she died in her father's arms. It's a really tragic story. This is the reality, the unfortunate, brutal reality for a lot of communities who know all too well how deadly knife crime can be. It's usually a lot of these very, very liberal, far-left commentators on programs like The View who have never actually seen any such violence, and so it's all theoretical for them. It's not really about saving people from knife crime. It's about labeling the police as racist or bigoted or hateful of the community that they're risking their lives every day to try and save.
What did you think of this video that's going viral of this BLM activist who was like taunting and harassing officers with this like fake narrative about, like stabbing young people for no reason?
There is no statistical evidence for most of the claims that Black Lives Matter make. And Ma'Khia Bryant got shot because she was about to stab someone. That is the key variable here. It's not because she was black. It's not because she was a 16-year-old girl that one person claimed was being adultified because she was big. Like, all of these are ridiculous claims. It is purely about the act that was being committed when the police officer arrived. So the fact that someone thought they were going to get shot by a police officer, I don't think they necessarily believe that. I do think it's great it went viral for completely the wrong reason in his mind.
Yeah, exactly. And the guy in the video is like, this is going to go viral. We're going to make this go viral. And
it's like, yep, you're right.
Made him look bad. I have a video I want to play for you, and then I'll get your reaction. It's of Black Lives Matter storming a state capitol. Roll tape. So that happened at the Oklahoma State Capitol. Based on like new definitions, wouldn't that be an insurrection, by the way?
I mean, it just shows that no one really cares about storming Capitol buildings as long as it can be labeled as conservative or leftist. Really, the issue here is that storming Capitols is bad. It was bad when so-called conservatives did it in January, and it's bad now. I just wish those who were so vocal in January were a tenth as vocal as they are now. And it's quite upsetting as someone who cares about law and order, who cares about our legislative system working properly, to see some people who were literally crying in January 6th when they saw people with MAGA flags doing it. But now it's something that Black Lives Matter are doing. Black Lives Matter are really this untouchable group right now because you cannot criticize them without being labeled a racist. And that's really the problem here, is that people aren't able to have frank, logical conversations for fear of being labeled as a bigot, which is really the problem we need to solve if we're going to solve the broader problem we're seeing right now.
And this video hardly got any national attention. Imagine if a bunch of QAnon supporters or like red hat wearing people showed up at the Capitol and did that. Could you just like imagine the news coverage this week?
Oh, well, it would be 24/7 coverage, but that's the same with really anything. I mean, you see violence statistics, for example, night after night after night. People are being executed in the streets, usually to do with gang violence. But unless it's being committed usually by a white person, or if that's not the variable they can find, with someone using an assault rifle, most of the legacy media and people on the left simply don't care. Yeah. Because all they're interested in is pushing the racial narrative. I think something we have to understand as well is America's generally, just stepping back from the political aspect, Americans don't care about race the way the left is trying to make them care about race. Like the Daily Wire had a poll recently showing that most Americans don't care about racial diversity when it came to the Oscars. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's sports, politics, culture. Americans are simply over race. And I think the Democrats are very worried in their planning rooms because really race is all they have. If they don't have race to divide us, they have to go based on policy, and that's where they start to get a little bit worried.
Yeah, I would argue that their focus on race is actually racist, because like the rest of us just go about our day. We're not like judging people by their skin color or their religion or anything. And so they have this like high like focus on it, and it's so obnoxious, and it's infiltrating like our government, our schools, everything else, and it's just in our face every day. And I know that people are getting tired of it, minorities as well, and anyone with common sense knows that's not good for our country and our community. It is dividing us. Anyways, Ian, we're going to leave it here. Thank you for your insight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Coming up next, before you go planning your next fundraiser, there's some information you might want to know. We'll have details on that after the break. Stay with us.